So let's turn to the Democrats, because it hasn't only been the Republicans who've been in power, and that sucking sound from the bottom to the top has been quite as loud. In July, Hillary Clinton outlined her economic vision in a speech at the New School here in New York City.
First, hardworking families need and deserve tax relief and simplification. Second, those at the top have to pay their fair share. That's why I support the Buffett rule, which makes sure that millionaires don't pay lower rates than their secretaries. I've also called for closing the carried interest loophole, which lets wealthy financiers pay an artificially low rate. And let's agree that hugely successful companies that benefit from everything America has to offer should not be able to game the system and avoid paying their fair share, especially while companies who can't afford high-priced lawyers and lobbyists end up paying more.
Your response to what Hillary Clinton has said, someone you know well.
It's a step in the right direction, Amy, but it's not far enough. I mean, we do have to substantially increase taxes at the top if we're going to have enough money to do everything that needs to be done with regard to investing in education, infrastructure, do a lot of things that, despite President Obama's efforts, have still not been done. But I think we even have to go beyond that and really change the way the market is organized. I mean, if you look at antitrust law, for example, you've got huge combinations now in health insurance, in airlines, in banking, in food. That means Americans are spending much more than otherwise for all of these basic necessities. Airlines may not be a necessity, but certainly the others are necessities. And that's a redistribution upward.
And you recently, in an op-ed piece in the New York Times, talked about the digital monopolies and the need to break up some of these companies now that have such an enormous influence over our lives, the Googles and the Amazons and the Facebook. Could you talk about that?
Well, up until quite recently, we had antitrust scrutiny, very careful antitrust scrutiny of some of these big high-tech firms. They are creating larger and larger entry barriers. It's harder for other companies to get into the business because they have platforms that are basically network monopolies over whether it's search or shopping or whatever you want. And that huge market power, those network monopolies, end up giving them the power to keep competitors out, ultimately charge higher prices, but also deter innovation. We need to apply antitrust law. I don't mean we necessarily have to bust them up, but we've got to make sure that we don't stifle innovation, and we've got to make absolutely sure that consumers down the line are not ending up paying too much.
And you mentioned in your book, I thought it was a fascinating nugget, that Google and Apple are spending more money acquiring the patents of others and than they are and fighting over these patents in court cases than they are in actually new research and development.
And also on litigation and
yes.
on lobbying. I mean, Google is now the #1 lobbyist in Washington. It's simply kind of a consequence of having more and more market power. And it's not, I'm not saying Google is a bad company. I'm not saying Apple is bad. I'm not saying that companies are not bad. People are not companies. Companies are not people, despite what the Supreme Court says. But what you've got to be careful of in an economy is the aggregation of market power that turns into political power, inevitably. And we've seen that again and again. And that's what antitrust laws were created for in 1890, the Sherman Act. And yet antitrust scrutiny has waned over time.
I want to go to Bernie Sanders. Your book is called Saving Capitalism: For the Many, for the Few. He is a socialist. He is a Democratic presidential candidate. In July, he was interviewed in an event hosted by the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce at the Museum in Washington, D.C., and was asked about his position on financial institutions and his support for reinstating the GlassSteagall Act, which separated commercial from investment banking and was repealed in 1999. This is a part of what he said.
We have 6 of the largest financial institutions in this country who have assets of about $10 trillion, which is equivalent to about 60% of the GDP of the United States. So point number one, you have a handful of huge financial institutions that have enormous economic clout. They issue a significant amount of the mortgages in this country and the credit cards in this country. So the first issue is, for a vibrant economy, do we think it is a good idea for a handful of financial institutions to have that much economic clout? What Wall Street has done is create a business model which says we really don't care about small and medium-sized businesses. What we care is about being an island unto ourselves, coming up with the most esoteric financial tools imaginable that nobody in the world knows, but enables Wall Street to make huge, huge amounts of money in highly dangerous and speculative activities. That led us to the Wall Street crash of 2008, which created the worst economic downturn since the Great Recession. I personally believe that the business model of Wall Street is fraud. When I was in the House, I was a member of the House Financial Services Committee that dealt with deregulation. And we had the Clinton people, and we had the Republicans coming before us. And you remember what they said? They said, it's a great idea if we merge investment banks with commercial banks, with large insurance companies. It'll be great for us internationally. I never believed it for 1 second, fought against it. So, to my mind, what we have to do is, A, reestablish GlassSteagall, maintain those separate entities, but second of all, more importantly, we have got to break them up.
That's Bernie Sanders. Actually, GlassSteagall was repealed under the Clinton administration in 1999. Robert Reich.
Bernie Sanders is right. We've got to reestablish GlassSteagall.
And explain why it's so important.
Well, because after the crash of 1929, the United States set out to prevent that kind of crazy risk-taking by the banking sector that led to the crash of 1929. We're not talking about 2008. We're talking about 1929. One thing we did was separate commercial banking from investment banking so that people's deposits, the ordinary savings of ordinary people, would not be used for gambling operations by the investment banks. We ought to maintain that. I mean, that's one of the reasons that we got into trouble again. We also need to bust up the biggest banks. Bernie Sanders actually understated the reality. I mean, the 5 biggest banks that used to have 10% of total banking assets back in 1990 now have 44% of total banking assets in this country. I mean, they are far too big to fail. I mean, they are so large that they are, just because of their political clout and their scale, they are gaining more and more market share of the entire banking industry. That's dangerous. It's dangerous for the economy. It's dangerous for our political culture because those banks have a great deal of political power.
You've also talked about welfare reform. You were the labor secretary when President Clinton signed off on this, and your experience that day as he was signing off in the White House. You were his guy, but you weren't standing next to him.
No, I was very disappointed that he signed that bill that came over from the Republicans to basically get rid of welfare and substitute a 5-year maximum lifetime public help for people, because 5 years in somebody's lifetime is it may not be enough. In fact, we discovered in the Great Recession it was not enough. But look, if you're in the president's cabinet, you're not going to agree with the president on everything, and there are certain things that you have to ask yourself: is it worth resigning over, or can I do more good inside? There's no easy answer to that.
And Hillary's stance at the time?
I don't know what her stance at the time was. I do not think that she ought to be blamed or credited for what her husband did as president. I don't think that's fair to her. I think she has to stand as a candidate separately. But she needs to be, as every candidate needs to be, including Bernie Sanders, pushed to be bolder on issues that are really critically important to America at this time.